Twin Busch, Germany, your competent partner for lifting platforms and vehicle garage equipment with 12 branches in 7 countries.
Hello! Today we will show you how to correctly assemble the TW445E-400-G from Twin Busch. Before starting the assembly, you should take some time to consider the optimal position of your Twin Busch lift. To plan the space conditions in the best possible way, it is recommended to first draw a vertical line from the rear wall, leaving space on the left-hand side for operation and working. This baseline marks the edges of the column bases. The motor unit will protrude a good distance beyond the baseline, which you should take into account when planning the escape routes. The clearance distances for the escape routes around the lift depend on the number of people who are expected to use an escape route and are, for example, specified by the Federal Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. In any case, you should allow for at least 1 meter of clearance. We draw additional guidelines along which the edges of the column bases can be aligned. This makes it easy to estimate in advance how the lift will later be positioned in the room. We take the exact distances from the operating manual. Your TW445E-400-G lift is delivered in a single package. In addition, you will need 10 L of hydraulic oil. These are consumables and are not automatically included in the scope of delivery. They must be ordered separately. Open the package using a sharp knife and remove the plastic film. Between the runways, you will find the columns, the crossbeams, and all other parts of your lift. Carefully remove the packing straps. Warning! These are under tension. We keep the wooden board, as we will need it later for the assembly. Now the retaining bolts of the main column are removed. Here we see the main column, recognizable by the mounting plate of the control box. Now remove the main column, to which the control box and motor unit will later be attached. Between the runways, you will find the crossbeam, the drive-on ramps, and a box containing small parts. Remove the box containing the small parts. Open the box and check its contents. The box with the small parts contains bolts with damping rings, washers, snap rings, and nuts for fastening the motor, screws for mounting the protective cover, bolts with washers and snap rings for fastening the runways, as well as safety pins with circlips for securing the steel cables. In addition, there is a return hose for oil-containing air, a safety device for the hydraulic hose, mounting plates for fastening the drag chain, a contact plate for the limit switch, and 2 cover plates. Now remove the control box. Now remove the retaining bolts of the other columns. Then the other columns can be removed. Here we see the drag chain, through which the oil hose and cables will later run. Then we remove the drive-on ramps. Remove the safety lock ladders. Then we remove the first crossbeam. This requires at least 2 strong persons. The crossbeam can also be moved using suitable lifting equipment. Together, we now have the 4 columns, the control box, 2 drive-on ramps, 4 safety lock ladders, and 2 crossbeams. Next, we take care of the motor unit and the motor cover. We remove the motor cover and open the box containing the motor unit. The manual is included with the motor unit. Before proceeding with the assembly, take out the enclosed manual and read it carefully before starting the installation. During the entire assembly, check all bolts for tightness and retighten them if necessary. Be sure to ensure that the columns cannot tip over until their final fixation. After all parts of our lift have been removed, we can begin the assembly. Place the first crossbeam in such a way that there is enough space for mounting the columns. The 2 crossbeams are completely symmetrical. However, note that at this step, the small cover plate must be on top. To insert the safety lock ladders into the crossbeam, the locking mechanisms at the top and bottom of the crossbeam must be pulled by hand. Now insert the safety lock ladder into the designated guide in the crossbeam. Insert the safety lock ladders far enough so that they engage in the 7th position. All safety locks must be set in the same locking position so that the crossbeams are level when the columns are raised later. Then we repeat the last steps on the other side. Remove the nut and washer from the safety lock ladder and screw the second nut a good distance down. We start by inserting the columns on the assistance side, where we need one of the 3 standard columns. To insert the ladder, guide the threaded rod into the designated hole at the top of the column. Then place the nut and washer back on from the outside and screw the inner nut upwards. The safety lock ladders will be precisely adjusted only after the assembly is completed. Repeat these steps on the other side of the crossbeam. This time, however, use the main column, which can be identified by the brackets for the motor unit and the control box. Raise the 2 columns together with the crossbeam and position them in their future location. Normally, the lift is anchored to the floor only at the very end of the assembly, once all tensions have been removed from the structure. In our case, since suitable heavy-duty anchors from an identical lift are already in place, we are fastening them to the floor right now. We will then show the exact procedure for setting a heavy-duty anchor again at the end of the video. Repeat these assembly steps with the second crossbeam and the 2 remaining columns. Be sure to ensure that the columns cannot tip over until their final fixation. Then we also move the second pair of columns close to their future position. We do not align the columns precisely yet, as we still need space to position the runways. Now remove the inner cover plate on the rear crossbeam. Then remove the cable ties under the main runway to take out the ends of the steel cables from the runways. Before threading the steel cables, both nuts must be removed from the threaded rod. Then we relieve the upper runway using a forklift or other suitable lifting equipment. Since the runway must then be lifted over the crossbeam, a lifting device with a side shift function is recommended. Now we can unbolt the first runway and remove it from the transport frame. After loosening the bolts, the runway can be carefully lifted out of the transport frame. With the wooden board on the forklift forks, we can, in our case, also move the runway without the side shift function. Before placing the runway onto the crossbeam, the ends of the steel cables must be completely removed from the runway. The 2 cable ends are guided into the crossbeam on the left and right sides. Here we can see how the cable must later run through the crossbeam. Once the cables are out of the way, the runway can be placed onto the crossbeam. Then we continue working on the front side of the runway. Here as well, remove the inner cover plate. Before connecting the crossbeam and the runway, the steel cables are also routed into the crossbeam here. Then the columns with the crossbeam can be pushed in from the front underneath the runway. As a rule, before anchoring the front columns, the lift should be fully lowered once after assembly in order to release any tension in the steel structure. Then the runway is fastened with bolts, spring washers, and flat washers. At the rear end, we first insert the rear bolts. Now, let's also install the roll-off protection. Now we move on to the second runway. The second runway is also lifted over the cross beams. The second runway is now also relieved with the forklift in order to release the transport frames. After releasing the transport frame, the runway can be lifted over the cross beams. To lift the runway over the cross beams, it must be positioned at an angle on the forklift tines. The right runway can be mounted closer or farther apart, depending on whether vehicles with a narrow or wide track width will later be driven onto the lift. Here, we are mounting it in the wide configuration. After that, we immediately install the roll-off protection using the inner bolts. Now, let's return to the steel cables. To route the steel cables, the cylinder must be almost completely pulled out of the piston. To do this, we first remove the plastic cap from the hydraulic cylinder. Before continuing with the assembly, let's take a quick look at the completed cable routing for better understanding. From the hydraulic cylinder in the left runway, 4 steel cables first run to the front end of the runway, and from there over guide pulleys to the tops of the 4 columns. When the hydraulic cylinder retracts, all 4 cables pull the runways upward evenly. To route the steel cables, remove the guide pulley from the crossbeam by loosening the bolt. Then thread the cable through the crossbeam and immediately reinstall the guide pulley. Here we see the cable routing between the guide pulley and the small pulley for the slack cable safety switch. At the top, we insert the end of the rope through the appropriate hole, where the rope runs exactly vertically, and secure it with 2 nuts that must be locked against each other. Finally, secure the cable with the appropriate pin and circlips to prevent it from accidentally slipping out of the pulley. The other cables must then be routed in the same way. After the cables have been routed, we open the cover on the front crossbeam of the lift. Pre-routed cables are already located here. The cables from the right side are routed over to the main runway. The open cable ends are now routed through the left hole of the crossbeam into the main runway. Now, let's also route the compressed air hose for the optional jacking beam. To do this, we first remove the adapter so that the hose can be routed through the crossbeam. Then we route the compressed air hose through the crossbeam to the other side of the runway. There, the adapter is reattached. Afterwards, the cover can be reinstalled. Now the covers at the front and rear of the crossbeam can be reinstalled. Under the runway, the plugs are then connected according to the corresponding letters. Afterwards, secure the cables with cable ties. Then the wiring in the rear crossbeam is carried out in a similar way as in the front one. The only difference is that the plugs are not connected directly to the sockets under the runway. The cables from the front and rear crossbeams will be connected later to the cable from the control box. Now let's move on to the control box. First, we remove the package containing the cables and limit switches. Carefully cut open the packages. Here we see the multi-cable and the 2 limit switches. Now loosely insert the screws for the control box into the mounting plate on the main column. After that, the control box can first be hooked in place and then screwed on. After opening the cover, the control box can be screwed on from the inside. After tightening the screws, the control box cover can be mounted in an offset position to relieve the cables. Remove the motor unit. For mounting the motor unit, first insert 2 bolts with damping rubber, washer, snap ring, and nut into the upper holes. We prepare the bolts for hanging, as shown here, leaving plenty of space between the bolt head and the damping rubber. The motor unit can then simply be hung onto the main column. Then also insert the 2 lower bolts with damping rubber, washer, snap ring, and nut, and tighten all 4 bolts securely. Next, let's install the oil hose. To do this, first remove the existing adapter and replace it with the long adapter. Be sure to reuse the old gasket. Now, let's install the bracket for the drag chain on the main column. For easier installation, first remove the bars on the inside of the drag chain. To do this, slightly twist the bars. One bar should be left in the chain for stabilization. Then attach the drag chain to the main column and fasten it securely. The other end is fastened to the runway with an angle bracket. The compressed air hose from the runway can then be routed into the drag chain, and the multi-cable from the drag chain into the runway. After the multi-cable, the oil hose with the straight end is routed into the runway side. The oil hose is then routed far enough into the column so that it reaches the connection on the hydraulic cylinder. The ventilation hose for the cylinder is still missing. This too is inserted into the runway far enough to reach the connection on the cylinder. Now we first connect the hydraulic hose to the hydraulic power unit. To do this, remove a single bar on the outside of the drag chain to route the hose through. Then the curved end of the hydraulic hose, together with the hose safety device, is connected to the extension of the hydraulic power unit. Let's now turn to the underside of the runway. The hydraulic hose is routed through the upper 3 channels to the front, towards the cylinder connection. Then securely screw the hydraulic hose onto the hydraulic cylinder. The ventilation hose is connected to the other end of the cylinder. Through this hose, any possible oil residues from the cylinder are carried back into the oil tank. Now, let's move on to the wiring between the multi-cable and the open ends. The wiring is done according to a table supplied with the lift. In this table, the numbers from the multi-cable are assigned to the letters of the open cables. After connecting, secure the cables with cable ties. Now, let's route all the cables and hoses into the drag chain. The ventilation hose is routed together with the hydraulic hose to the hydraulic power unit. The compressed air hose ends here for the time being in the drag chain. If you require the compressed air connection for a jacking beam, you must establish the connection to your workshop's compressed air system at this point. Then the bars of the drag chain can be reinserted. Finally, place the cover back on the runway side. Now, let's quickly install the contact plate on the crossbeam at the main column. The plate activates the limit switch when lifting. Before the first lift, you should check that the contact plate hits the limit switch precisely. Then the limit switch belonging to the contact plate can be mounted at the top end of the main column. The cable of the limit switch is routed through the designated channel down to the control box. The limit switch is mounted at an angle with 2 screws, as shown here. The end of the limit switch cable is routed into the control box at the bottom. Then we repeat the process with the lower switch for foot protection. Here, the cable is first routed upward through the channel. The limit switch is then mounted vertically with 2 screws. Before mounting, we make sure that the actuating arm, as shown here, is positioned at a 90-degree angle to the switch. The cables from the foot guard switch are also routed into the control box. Now let's move on to the wiring inside the control box. Please note that the following electrical installation must only be carried out by a qualified electrician. First, we route all open cable ends into the interior of the control box. Here we see the cable of the solenoid-operated hydraulic valve. Next comes the multi-core cable. After that, the cable for the motor is connected. For the exact wiring inside the control box, please refer to the operating manual. Afterwards, the control box can be closed again. To fill the oil tank, we first remove the solenoid-operated drain valve to create more space. Then the oil tank cap can be unscrewed. The oil tank can then be filled with oil up to the maximum level line. After the lift has been raised once, additional oil can be added while it is in the lowered position. Then reinstall the magnetic coil. Now we also install the vent hose for oil recovery. It is cut to the required length and connected to the hydraulic unit. Then tighten the nut securely. After connecting the lift to the power supply, it can now be switched on and raised for the first time. Since the slack rope protection has not yet been tested, please also hold down the side button on the control box while raising the lift. After tensioning the cables, the slack rope protection switch must be checked at all 4 corners to ensure it is positioned correctly. The actuating arm must be above the nut, as shown here. Afterwards, the lift can be fully lowered to release any possible tension between the columns. This allows the columns to slide precisely into the position where they are to be anchored. Then the lift should be raised completely once to test the limit switch. We will now show you how to correctly screw the platforms with heavy-duty anchors. Using a 2-post lift as an example, it is essential to note the required depth of the drill hole and the concrete thickness. If the heavy-duty anchor is not properly sunk into the concrete, or if the concrete does not meet the technical specifications, the stability of the platform may be impaired. Please refer to the operating instructions for the exact technical specifications. The platform does not need to be moved to set the heavy-duty anchors. Drill vertically and note the required depth of the drill hole. Clean the drill holes carefully, for example by blowing. Drive the heavy-duty anchor in carefully and straight using a sledgehammer. Before tightening the nuts, the columns must be checked for vertical alignment. If necessary, shim the posts on the heavy-duty anchors with the shims supplied. Once the columns are aligned, tighten the nuts with a torque wrench to the torque required according to the instructions. Then we raise the lift to a low working height. Now the protective caps of the cable mechanism are reinstalled. Now the drive-on ramps can be installed. To do this, remove the circlip from the pin and attach the drive-on ramps with the pin. Don't forget to reinstall the circlip at the end. Finally, the protective cover for the motor block is installed. This completes the assembly of your TW445E 4-post lift.
Visit us in one of our branches. With 12 branches in 7 countries also in your area. We offer advice and product demonstrations in our showrooms, as well as sales and technical service on-site with our service fleet. Warehouse logistics with large stock of products available for an immediate delivery. Spare parts and repair service assembly videos with step-by-step instructions, as well as constant new and further developments of our products. Everything from a single source, from lifts to tire changes and tire balances. Awarded 9 times as the best brand. Twin Busch Germany, your competent automotive garage supplier.